Okay, so going back to the beginning, I just turned on the recorder, I forgot. So class, what is a class? You need to know that definition. The method, what is a statement? Statements typically end with a semicolon, but they can be also inside of a set of curly braces. A comment, end of line comment would be 2 slashes and then goes to the end of the line. And then block comment, so you want to do multiple lines that you want to comment out. You start with a slash star and you end with a star slash. It's kind of an odd thing, but that'll allow you to comment more than one line. Yeah, I do. If I have code I don't want to activate yet because it's not ready, so I put a block around it, or maybe it's code that I'm trying to copy, not exactly, but I need to have an example there. So I leave it in there for a while I code something similar, and then I get rid of it later. So it's just a way of shutting off a certain section of code off and on. You also use them in the function when you're describing a method. You use block comments to show that description in a special kind of comment called a Java comment. The string class, basically, what is a string? Is all I'm asking, really. Now, remember, a string is just a sequence of symbols or characters. It could be numeric, it could be letters, could be spaces, could be a lot of different things. It's just a string, a bunch of letters all strung together. Be one way of looking at it. Also, an object. Don't get object and class mixed up. Okay, a lot of people get those two definitions mixed up. So the analogy I always use for objects is I look at the class as being the cookie cutter. It's the template. Okay, so you can cut lots of cookies with that cookie cutter, but there's only one template. That's the class. But you can make lots of cookies. Each cookie could be considered an object. It's made from that template. So the class is the template. The object is what gets created by that template, or is the cookie. You can't eat the cookie cutter, but you can eat the cookie, right? All right, so that's how I remember the two and kind of separate these two. Here's some other words that you'll need to know the definition of. Parameter. Okay, those are those little bits of data you send into a method so that it can do its job. Other things to know, that Java programs run without change on different platforms. So it's a cross-platform language. When I need to make sure that a program runs on multiple different platforms, I usually choose Java as my way of doing that. The file extension for the Java source file. What is the file extension? Well, what is a file extension? It's that stuff. When you see a dot and a little bit after some text after the dot, what's called the file extension. It tells the operating system what kind of file this is. The file extension for Java is, well, Java, .java. You just put .java, and now the operating system knows that's a Java source file. What is the purpose of a semicolon in the Java language? That's to end the statement. It's a way of ending statements. One way to gauge the size of a program is how many statements are in the program. So what you can do for a rough guesstimate of how big a piece of code is you count the number of semicolons. That tells you how many statements roughly are in the program. And then you can size it. It took me 4 weeks to write a 2,000 statement code, a bunch of code. So the next time you have a project that's similarly sized, you can kind of guesstimate how long it's going to take you to write. Other things to know for the test, that in Java, you call methods on an object. So you have this object. The object has a set of methods that were defined for it by the class. So it's the methods that do stuff. You can think of the methods as being the verbs and the objects as being the nouns. Okay. What is the syntax for calling the method println? That's an L, so that's println. Say system is capitalized, system.out.println. That's how you actually print a blank line, let's say. What symbol identifies the characters in a string? And that's, remember, all our strings are surrounded by double quotes. A double quote on one side, double quote on the other side. And that tells you the boundaries of the string. Note too that Java is case sensitive, so capitalization matters. If you spell something differently using different capitalization, the compiler is not going to understand that. Those are considered two different identifiers. So you have to make sure that not only do you spell the words correctly, but you also get the right uppercase and lowercase. Also know that the name of a Java source file and the name of the class it contains must be the same. This is the weirdest thing about Java, is that the class name has to match up capitalization and spelling with the file name itself. I've never seen that before in any other language. I'm not sure why that's a restriction, but it really messes up a lot of things. It really is quite terrible. You change the name of your class, say you don't like the class name, you change it, and then you forget to change the file name that the class resides in, the compiler won't compile it and everything goes south. So again, just keep the name of the class and the name of the file. If you have a class named cookie, let's say, it better be in a file called cookie.java. What is a Java library? Basically, there's a set of classes and methods on those classes that kind of hang together and provide you capabilities, so you don't have to code it from scratch. You can use prepackaged code that's already working for doing different tasks. And we've been doing this a lot. We've been calling these a lot. We've been using scanner, the scanner class, to read in stuff. That's in the Java library. Here's some more definitions that you'll need to know. What is a variable? What is an identifier? Identifier is a very generic kind of ambiguous term. Identifier is a name you give something. So sometimes you have to put a name on a variable. Sometimes you need to come up with a name for a method. Sometimes you have to come up with a name for a class. Well, there's certain rules when it comes to identifiers that you need to follow. All of those are identifiers. Even though they're all different things, you can think of an identifier as something when you have to come up with a name for it. That's what you're looking for. Accessor, basically that allows you access to the data in an object. Another way you can think of that is a get function. Let's call it an accessor. Some people call them getters. I think it sounds stupid, so I just call it a get method, or I call it an accessor. A mutator is something that changes the class, changes the data in an object. So you can consider these to be set functions. They set a new value for a variable in an object. So that's considered to be a mutator. So accessors and mutators, getters and setters, or get methods and set methods, all mean the same thing. Now, groups of classes of like classes are grouped together in things called packages. This is how Java puts everything together. It's similar to what you might see in Linux if you're a Linux person when it comes to apartments and things like that. It's just a way of grouping classes that have the same goal or share a similar purpose. Usually put those in a package. Now, because we're in Replit, we're not really learning too much about packages because Replit doesn't really support packages like the way I've normally seen them. So we're just getting rid of all the packages. But keep in mind that that's a feature of Java. You also need to know the purpose of each of these three data types. There's the double data type. Double data type is used to store real numbers, numbers that have a decimal point and numbers to the right of the decimal point. They can be positive and negative or zero, but they have a fractional portion to the right. Ints are a lot more limited. Those are whole numbers, the counting numbers plus zero plus all the negative numbers as well. On how large a number you can store in an int or in a double, those numbers are pretty big. But if you're counting the number of stars in our galaxy, then you might want to think of using a bigger data type, because I don't think either of these data types perhaps would be able to hold that. We'd have to see. Yeah, I can go really high. So how many stars are there in just in our galaxy? Well, there's over 1 billion, I would imagine. And then there's billions of galaxies. So wow, the number of galaxies in the universe, you might run out of space. Yeah. Well, I don't know. If you have billions of galaxies and each galaxy has billions of stars. Yeah, you're right. It probably would fit. But in an int, if you were counting with an int, it probably wouldn't be able to hold that. But you'd have to look. And then also know how to declare each of these types shown above. So how do you actually create a variable that's a double, a variable that's an int, a variable that's a string? String is different because string is an object, where the other two are primitive types. So I'd look at how do you construct objects? And we went over that as well. Other things to know the rules that govern what makes up a valid identifier. Like here's some examples. You can't start a name that you have to come up with an identifier with a number. You can't say 3 dogs is my variable. With the number, the numeral 3 at the start, it'll think it's a number and try to parse that as a number, and then the compiler will crash. You also can't use anything but uppercase and lowercase letters, underscores, $signs. That's it. You can't, there's no spaces or anything like that. You can't start with a number. How are variables typically named? Well, they usually start with a lowercase letter, and then for every subsequent word in the name, instead of a space, you put a capital letter. That's called camel case. Kind of looks like a camel if you look at it. How are classes typically named? They usually start with a capital letter. Classes are the only things in Java that start with a capital letter except for constants. Constants also start with a capital letter, but everything else starts with a lowercase letter. So you can always tell pretty much when you're looking at a class name because it starts with a capital letter. Now, is this enforced by the compiler? The answer is no. It's enforced by most Java programmers. That's what they're used to. It's just a rule of thumb or a way Java is typically coded. What's the name of this equals operator? It's not called the equals operator. It's called the assignment operator. It takes the value on the right and assigns it to the thing on the left. The things on the left now has that new value that was on the right side of the equal sign. Know also how to change the value of a variable. Well, that's easy. You just use an assignment operator. You take some value and assign it a new value to the variable, and now the variable has a new value in it. How variables, you need to know how variables are declared and given an initial value. So you could say like int count equals 5, semicolon. That would not only declare that the count variable is an integer, but it'll also give it an initial value. Sometimes you need to put initial values on variables, especially if you start using them right away. But if say your variable comes from the user or from outside, you can declare the variable but not store anything until later on in the code. Also know that a method is a sequence of instructions that manipulates the data of an object. Very important definition. Okay. Anytime you see a word that's italicized and in bold, that's a word you need to know the definition of. So anytime you see that in any of my slides, I make sure that the key terms that you need to know for the class are in bold and italicized. You know which ones are the most important definitions to learn. Also know that the output of a method is called its return value. Some methods don't return anything, so their return value is set to void. But a lot of methods have a return value. Say it does some kind of torturous calculation and spits out the result. More things to know. Know what the return value of void represents. Again, I just mentioned that void represents that this method doesn't return a value. So if you try to assign the output of this method to something, it's not going to work because it doesn't return anything. Know which keyword is used to create an object. The keyword I'm looking for here is the new keyword. What is a keyword? A keyword is reserved by the language, so you can't use it as an identifier. Like you can't call a variable new because there's already the Java language already has the word new defined already, and so you can't use that as an identifier. What's the syntax of a call to a constructor? Well, say new, and then remember the constructor name has the same name as the class. So you just put the class's name there, and it will call that class's constructor. Also know the purpose of an import statement. It allows you to import the definitions of classes and how to call them from the Java library. Sometimes you create the library. Like, for example, next time we meet, Java 1 will start creating their shapes library, while in Java 2, we'll be creating our dice class, because we're going to be making a dice game in Java 2. Object reference refers to an object's location in memory. I'm losing my mic for some reason. And an object reference refers to an object location in memory. It refers to that. It's kind of like a pointer to where in memory that object's data is being stored. Also know that object variables store object references. This is different than what you'd see in C and C++. You can actually store object variables directly. You don't have to go through a reference, but in Java you have to. So also you need to know that assigning one object to another creates two object references that refer to the same location in memory. It's a little bit odd, and it's not what you might anticipate. We talked about this yesterday, or last time we met, I guess. So object references work a little bit differently than primitive data types. In primitive data types, it makes a copy, but for object references, it doesn't. All right, so that's everything you need to know for Java 1. These are the things that you need to focus on when you're getting ready for the test. Again, just a reminder that our metric conversion library is due this Sunday. Or it's not due, it's actually the last day to turn it in is this Sunday. So if you're struggling with that, I haven't got too many emails yet. I've got a couple, and I need to answer a few, but I haven't got many. I'm starting to worry that no one's done the assignment yet, because you should have a few questions when it comes to that. So if you're not done with that, maybe if you're in Java 1, you use the rest of today's class time to finish up the metric conversion library assignment. It's going to take a while because there's a lot of typing. Although it follows the same pattern over and over again, there is a lot of typing involved. So any questions for Java 1 before we turn the page over to Java 2?